Hey everybody, James Neufeld here. Really excited to be having a conversation with one of our newest partners that we're thrilled to be partnering with. A company that I think needs very little introduction, but we will. But a company that has been a pioneer in geospatial intelligence and mapping technologies for a very very long time. So today, I'm really excited to be chatting with you, Chris. Chris is the director of public safety business development at Esri. So today, appreciate you hanging out, Chris, and chatting all things partnership, geospatial intelligence, and just kind of having a conversation on where the industry is going. Looking forward to getting into it, and thanks so much for joining me today, Chris.
Yeah, happy to be here, James. Yeah, we're super excited about the partnership that we're establishing with Samdesk. We think that there's a lot of opportunity for our customers to take advantage of the work that you all do, and I think vice versa. We see similar opportunities for Samdesk customers to sort of extend their use of Samdesk into new workflows and other opportunities by working with Esri. So yeah, happy to chat on all things geospatial and mapping, and hopefully give your listeners some ideas of things that they could be doing beyond maybe what they're doing today.
Awesome, Chris. Yeah, our philosophy at Samdesk is, I mean, we're generally new kids on the block, right? We are a startup, so we have the advantage of sometimes not being the smartest people in the room, which we love, and we like going in and learning and being like, what are your tools and systems, and overwhelmingly, what we hear teams that we work with consistently is like, hey, can you guys live inside of Esri? Is that possible? Because this is like our single pane of glass. This is like our source of truth for all these different use cases that are new to us. And it's really been awesome to see, yeah, the real push from customers, I would say as well, just being like, hey, this is a great layer into our Esri environment for a lot of things that maybe we can unpack a couple of those today. So yeah, it's awesome. It's our favorite approach, Chris, is just hearing it directly from customers' mouth. And it's been so cool for us to see. And it'd be good to get a comment maybe from you on, where's Esri positioning itself today? I know Esri has a long history. You've been there for a long time, so I'd love to hear kind of your story of where things got started for you, why why you guys are doing the way the things you are doing, and what led you to being in pretty much every operation center that we've been in, and we've seen. How did you guys get there? It's super impressive. Would love to hear part of the story, Chris.
Yeah, no, happy to share. I guess we come at it from a different perspective. We are the furthest thing from a startup. I think we were founded in 1969, so we're 55 years old. As a software company, that's pretty impressive place to be. And so we've seen a lot of things and been through a lot of sort of technology shifts over the decades. But my personal journey started at Esri over 20 years ago. I've been working. I work in our Washington D.C. office, so a lot of my work has been in the national security space and public safety as well. So yeah, we look at how to apply the technology to all different kinds of problems. But maybe for folks who aren't familiar with Esri,
Yeah.
we claim to be a software company that's building geographic information systems, which is really just a long way to say that we help our customers use location to solve problems, right? To really look at the where aspect of their business challenges, and help them organize and manage and analyze and visualize data from a spatial component, right? And a lot of times that gets sort of actualized on a map, but you can think about all the different sort of tools and technologies that have to happen to sort of get data sort of organized and to understand relationships between different data sets in order to actually get it onto the map so that it can drive a decision. And we like to say that 80% of data has some sort of location component to it, right? So every organization, regardless of what they're doing, that's working with data, trying to make better decisions, ultimately comes through a location lens, right? That they want to look at information and make decisions based on that. So that's where we come in, and that's where we help customers. And you can imagine, like you said, it applies across all kinds of different industries, right? So On the commercial side of the house, retail companies will look at, where to place stores based on, available sites, where their customers are, where their competitors are, right? Trying to optimize their investments from a commercial sort of business perspective, all the way through to government that's looking at how to better serve their communities, right, and their constituents, and understanding sort of what's going on in their communities, and better providing the services that they're providing. So yeah, there's lots of different use
Yeah.
cases. My responsibilities in the public safety space, like you mentioned, so we look at it from that perspective, right? How to reduce crime, how to help communities recover from disasters, more effectively, and a variety of different sort of aspects of keeping communities and people safe.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, I think to those in the GIS and kind of Esri community that, we know the importance of, how much geographical information is available amongst all data sets. But even just in our own journey, I know that's one of the hardest problems that we had to solve at Samdesk is we got, you know, what good is it to detect a crisis event if you don't know where it's happening? Or if you don't have that precision, right? How do you create a response around that? Or how do you actually take action or derive any kind of intelligence from that? If you're saying, hey, here's a bad thing that's happening or a situation that's developing, the speed to which we, are required by our customers to get geo precision is, it's overlooked part of it. I think we'd just be like, oh, there's something happening over there. But, if you're in a response situation, or if you're an end customer of an Esri environment or Samdesk environment, at least from an intelligence or response standpoint, maybe goes overlooked a little bit sometimes, Chris, of like how important it really is. And we just take it for granted sometimes, how hard the problem actually is and how crucial it is for all the downstream, the benefits that you get from the geovisualization kind of goes upstream to like, where are things actually happening and how good is your data sets to begin with. I know that's
Yeah,
something that we've been still trying to improve at Samdesk and continue to work on. And it's we call it sometimes a forever problem. How do you get continually refined geo precision on events
yeah,
and refinement, right?
yeah. Yeah, and I think the like understanding where something's happening is like a critical, like you said, it's like a critical piece of information. Like you can't all the things that happen after an event, like in terms of responding and recovering, are sort of predicated on knowing where that thing is happening, and then understanding what does that mean, right? And I think that's where sort of the marriage
Yeah.
of Esri and Samdesk really is interesting, because a lot of that, like, what does it mean, like the contextual information, is things that our customers are dealing with on a regular basis, right? They're building data sets, and they're creating information around, the business that an organization is running, right? Like I mentioned, the store locations, and
Yeah.
all of the supply chain, and the aspects of how they're operating their business are sort of managed within the GIS component. And then if you can intersect that with what's happening right now, and what that helps to understand, why should I care, or do I care, and ultimately, what do I do about it? Like, do I need to do something, and what action needs to be taken? So I think having that, the what's happening right now, plus the context in relation to either the business or the government organization that's trying to understand, what steps now need to be taken, are really where I think together we bring a lot of value to our customers.
Yeah, and I'd like to unpack that a little bit more, Chris. Right, like I think I've been aware of Esri for like many in the tech community for a very long time. Watching your guys' journey. Yeah, like as a 55-year-old tech company, not many people can say that that's awesome. But I think it took what was really most impressive to me to kind of watching the integration come together, right? So we're getting the Samdesk alerts and other data sorts of sets that we might have, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's that speed to understanding. It's like, how fast can you understand impacts? That's predicates on how fast you're able to respond or take whatever necessary action there might be, right? But I'd love to unpack a little bit and give a sense, I suppose, and I'll share my own journey a little bit with the Esri layers and just how rich this environment is, because I think sometimes people don't, outside of the Esri world, maybe don't even fully understand that. And so we see customer stories and examples where we'll detect a critical fire or a pipeline disruption or some sort of thing like that, and other mapping providers just it just tells you where it is. and it doesn't really tell you all the kind of surrounding areas. And what was so deeply impressive with I think, with the Esri environment is how many layers and contributions from different data sets there really are. Public fountains around the world, utility lines, weather overlays. Like it's hard to kind of encapsulate. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, but I think it's if you're trying to like say speed to awareness is really important for a critical event. Is this event happening near to critical infrastructure? That's typically a pretty hard problem to solve when you don't have Esri, right? But that's like the tip of the iceberg. There's so many layers of understanding of you know buried utility lines or whatever the case is that's just I think most
Yeah.
people don't understand the depth of geospatial intelligence provided by Esri, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I think it falls into a couple of different categories. I think we tend to provide a lot of that information just because we've been working in the space for so long that like over time we've sort of collected this catalog of data sets, and we sort of make that available to our users to have that as information that they can sort of bring in and sort of assimilate with whatever it is that they're doing in house, right, to
Right.
run their own business. So there's a lot of publicly available information that's really interesting and valuable that people maybe wouldn't necessarily even think to look for or would consider to be useful until they until they start using it, right?
Yeah.
And then they start to see the value. And then I think the other thing that's interesting is that there's a lot of most organizations are Esri customers somewhere in your organization, or there's typically somebody doing something with Esri, and they're building data sets specific to that organization's business
Right.
or mission, right? And I think that's the other thing that we find as we're working with you is that we tend to operate in different parts of an organization, and when we can bring together folks from within an organization, all of a sudden you start unlocking data sets. So it's not just about what's publicly available; it's also about what's available within that organization that can be brought to a workflow to better understand risk or a response workflow that you wouldn't necessarily even thought. So it's to some extent there's a catalog of information that Esri is providing, but there's also rich data sets that exist within organizations often that can be brought together with what you all are doing to really drive things forward.
I couldn't agree more, Chris. And I think that's kind of like what we think a lot about Samdesk, right? Is like how do we help that analyst or that end user make an informed decision as quickly as possible? And it's like what you're describing is like kind of that removing as many blind spots as we possibly can
Mhm.
throughout the process, right? So we didn't know there was a critical event happening in this area, so there's an awareness, but it sometimes it's the harder to quantify things like a transformer exploding, for example, or a car crash that might have gone somewhere. If you don't have that location intelligence of what's around that or how it might impact public utilities or travelers or your internal or external data sets, that's the difference, right? That's noise, or no, that's signal, because we
Yeah.
detected the event, but how do I understand that? And what we see, and I'd love your thoughts on kind of what you're seeing in the kind of this progression towards real time. I still see that there's a big gap in the market there, right? Like there's so much work that has to be done to, you know, take Baltimore Bridge as an example. We know what's happening. How much time it takes people to understand how does it impact them?
Yep.
And there's still so much work to be done there, I think.
Yeah. And that's a great example, right? Because that's like a very specific event and a very specific location, and there's sort of immediate uh, impacts, right, in terms of life and safety, and immediate impact on sort of that environment and how you sort of deal with that event. But then there's also the second and third order effects, right? Of that's a critical piece of our transportation infrastructure, and now there's impacts on global supply chain, right? And there's all these other things that sort of come into the picture, and a lot of that you know has a geospatial component to it in terms of how you then not only do you recover and rebuild that location, but you have to then look at how you adjust the supply chain, how you move goods and services around that, and those are all very very heavily location uh, based problems, right? So there's that's a really good that's a good example. I think the other thing, you know, in terms of this, like this from our perspective, this move to real time is really interesting. I mean, if you think about like the this long history that we have, you know, 55 years when the company is founded, right? You're talking like mainframe computers, and you got to write code or use punch cards in order to get anything done, and it's you know, it's a big lift to use the technology, and there's sort of it's very difficult to create data even, right? Like how do you digitize, you know, I think one of our first customers was like the Canadian Forest Service or something, right? And it's literally just mapping the massive extent of like forest lands in Canada, right? And that's the scale and that's the extent, and it's not a lot of data, but it's interesting to digitize that and get it sort of into a digital format. But as the technology evolves, right, and you go to PCs and you go to the internet and you go to the cloud and you go mobile devices, right? Like not only does the technology become easier to use and to access, but the data that's getting created is just like exploding, right? The amount of information, the type of information is, you know, off the charts. So you're struggling to try to understand that. And I think that's part of where we've had to make that journey with our customers to help them not only in the sort of core technology evolution, but what does that mean in terms of the data that's available to them, and then how staying ahead of that data to create the information, because they're still doing the same thing, which is trying to provide information to decision makers to improve, you know, an organization's you know, ability to operate effectively. And so you know, I guess to the real time problem, a lot of that data traditionally was very static just by the nature of the technology and the types of sensors and data that you were was being created was very static, and it oftentimes was very backward looking, right? We were describing things about a location that wasn't changing in real time or changing at all, right? We're describing the extent of a forest land, or we're describing census blocks and the characteristics of those things. And it's kind of a very static nature to the data. It's very valuable still. You can still use that information to make decisions, but there just wasn't real time information to sort of bring into that. And that's where we are now. We sort of hit this tipping point to where it's not enough to just understand what something was or what it is, but we now have to understand what's happening there now. And I think that's where working with Samdesk has been just a really it's eye opening for our customers that they even can have access to that type of information, because they're just they're hungry for that, right? I mean, if you think about the what our users do, they're data scientists. They're working with data. They're deep into understanding what is the data telling them, patterns, trends, you know, impacts, and they're hungry for information. They're hungry for that data, and the more data we can give them access to, and the better quality data we can give them access to, the more they can do, right? The more valuable they become to their organization. And by introducing them into what Samdesk is doing and the type of information you're providing, it just increases the value of what they're able to do, because now they can start to look at things from a different perspective. They can start to understand not only what a location is about and what that means, but like what is happening now and how that drives decisions about what to do about it. So yeah, I think it's a mind shift for our customers, because it's a different completely different source of information, but it also creates a completely different set of workflows that they then have to learn, and it creates a whole new set of value that they're bringing to their organization now.
I love the thought process, Chris, and just kind of like I think it's just a commentary on, kind of lack of a better term, kind of the world we live in right now, right? Something that we think a lot about at Samdesk, and what we say a lot, right, is that we live in an increasingly interconnected and volatile world. And it's the coexistence and collision of those things that kind of that's what's in my mind as you're talking about, this moving from, statically mapping forests, which is really important, and it creates a base layer of understanding, multiplied by many many more magnitudes than that of all the different data sets you have. But the world is changing, right? It's this continual shift. Like we have, we could talk about wildfires. We could talk about a lot of different things which are changing the landscape consistently in the real world, which is changing migration patterns. It's creating geopolitical, topics and issues that customers need to be aware of. And so, the world we live in, if we put it that way, right, is continually getting pushed and pulled in different directions. And so it's not a static environment that we live in. And I think governments and corporations alike, right, that's kind of like the underlying commentary that they're trying to struggle they're struggling to understand that in real time. Like, oh, I thought this of this
Yeah.
part of the world, or I thought this about my data set, but actually the rate of change on all of the underlying data sets is also increasing as a result of that, right? So we can't be very static anymore, from all different sides, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's where it's really interesting to hear you talk about your customer use cases and some of the things that they're struggling with that, how we're moving from static to we need to be more real time and dynamic data sets is super interesting.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, I mean, just think about the impact of climate change on like natural disasters, right? Like it's not enough to understand the past, right? And sort of the patterns of disaster and in the past, it no longer is a good indicator of the future, right? Because just the fundamentals are shifting, so that's no longer like enough to understand sort of the way things have happened previously, right? So there really is an opportunity to do better by understanding more in the now and being able to get better at getting predictive about what does that mean in terms of how things are happening going forward. So yeah, I think those are interesting. From a security perspective, I think another area where we find a lot of synergy with you all is just like in that security space, right? Like you mentioned, like you go into a security operations center, there's a lot of things happening in there that have a map, right? And in some cases, what you're seeing on the map is useful, and in some cases, it maybe not so much. But I think we've seen a lot of interest lately in organizations as they try to understand the threat environment and how to be proactive in how they prepare for and respond to things. And I think one interesting thing that we saw was coming out of the COVID pandemic, right, when you had the shift to this hybrid. I mean, we were talking about it when we got on before we jumped on here, right? Like this working from home, right? Everybody's working from home, or they're in a hybrid work environment. And I think we saw a very specific sort of signal from our customers, because I think they felt like they lost some control or some understanding of business impacts when all of a sudden they don't have a good handle on where the business is actually being conducted, right? Because
Right.
it used to be you had a couple of locations where you're primarily operating your business, and even if you don't have technology and systems in place, you have a good understanding of whether that location's being impacted by a hurricane or there's something going on there. Like it's easier to get your head around like impacts to these like known locations and a relatively small number of locations. And I think what we saw is when everybody went home and all of a sudden the business loses track of where critical functions are occurring and when they're potentially impacted and what does that mean to the business. Like now you actually have to employ technology, or you'd be better served to employ technology to really start understanding where are my people, what are they doing, what does that mean to the business, what's happening around them, are they going to be negatively impacted, do we have a safety like do we need to be concerned about their safety, yes or no, do we need to be concerned about how this is potentially impacting the business if they're not online, able to get online and do work. So I think it like there was like a fundamental shift where all of a sudden that was what just used to be kind of managed by organizations as sort of institutional knowledge, all of a sudden had to be sort of more purposefully understood and managed. And I think that's where we saw a lot of opportunity to just help customers map where are my people and where are the things we care about, and what does that mean to our business if these things are not operating as expected. And then you bring in Samdesk, related to that. Now you can really start to understand those impacts in real time.
I couldn't agree more, Chris. Right, like you need the both. Is the you and we've seen at so many different operation centers, and we've seen firsthand, how important that geospatial intelligence or that mapping layer that Esri provides. Right, that's the base layer of knowledge. This is my footprint. You need to map that, and you're right. Like it got after COVID, it got, I think, exponentially more difficult. Right, it's like now, no matter what size of company you had X amount of retail locations. You've got that now multiplied by your workforce, or any corporate office now multiplied by so many more moving parts. You couldn't brute force it anymore, right? You needed to have a mapping layer. You needed to have some sort of like, base understanding of where your footprint was, because your footprint. And then, we saw travel skyrocket in the middle of that as well too, where people were, at home more and traveling more. So not only did you have the exponential growth of nodes of locations we needed to now monitor, it's the complexity of the moving parts as well, which is, I can imagine, just like a harder than most people realize from a mapping perspective.
Yeah.
And so one thing that we think about, within that too, which is interesting, just from unpacking it from kind of like a philosophy standpoint, right? And it goes back a little bit, I think, to our conversation of like the move from static to real time, which is interesting to me. Chris, is talking about like the security function and how much that's changed after COVID, and that push from static to real time and dynamic uh, data sets. Right. I think it's also part of this mind shift and philosophy that's been happening, where it used to be my requirements were inside of my four walls. Right. That was my footprint. I needed to have access control and cameras, and absolutely still is the case. Those are required. It's not an either or conversation, but we argue it's no longer enough, and it's increasingly the external threats, or just forces of nature that are posing now the biggest problems to organizations. And that's, at the same time, it's the biggest probably gap in a security posture, right? So forced entry is now one of many problems that, we solved that one. It was done. Now work from home makes that a little bit more tricky. But you layer in unrest, climate change, all these different additional factors on top of that, right? And it's not access control that's your problem anymore, right? It's the things there. And that's where, genuinely, I think it's really impressive to see what the Esri team and the Samdesk team have been able to do together to really solve that 1-2 punch, right? Where am I, and what are all these external factors that I generally, there's no CCTV version of this that I can plug into that to know what's happening. I need an external feed of what's happening around me somehow. So I just find that very interesting, and I think that's just kind of a bigger shift that I think it's been really challenging for a lot of probably our joint customers, Chris, to think through that shift. We're like, hey, security used to mean this. Now, especially during COVID, I mean, we all became health experts, right? Had to write reports, and like none of us were. I'm not an epidemiologist, maybe some of them were, but it really pushed a lot of our customer bases to be very different than what they historically were, right? And it'd be interesting your thoughts on that. I don't, from my perspective, Chris, like I don't think that that's done. I still think that we're still in the middle of that shift massively, to be like, what does an intelligence report for my executive team look like now, right? So I don't know, do you feel like that trend is real for you guys? Is it continuing? Are we done it? Where do you think that we are in kind of those external forces that companies are trying to grapple with?
Yeah. Well, I think it's more than just the external forces. It's also a lot of the potential impact. Like you said, it's outside of your four walls, but it's also outside of your business, right? There are things
Right.
happening in locations in other organizations that you're dependent on, right? Like your supply chain, which is comprised of companies and locations that you don't have control over. You couldn't even get the CCTV and access control information because those are not your assets, but you're interested to know if those assets that those locations where those organizations are operating are potentially being impacted. So we can start to monitor, the supply chain or the interdependencies of the assets of other organizations or other critical infrastructure that could be impacting my business, even if I don't own those assets, right? So I think those are things, as we see organizations are very complex in sort of the things that they need in order to operate effectively, and giving them some visibility into what those things that are happening outside of their control or outside of their direct purview, that they can start to get ahead of some of these problems if they can see them coming, right? Like I think there's a lot there that there's opportunity to sort of help organizations think about that. Like think about how they can get their head around things that maybe are outside of their control, but that would be useful for them to know because it may impact their business, regardless. So
Yeah, love it, Chris. Yeah, that's it. I mean, for us, I think like the Baltimore Bridge is a good example. Just things of that nature, right? I mean, it's what I am probably most excited about with this partnership is we try to be very good at event detection at Samdesk. We try to like hone in that signal to noise ratio so that we're providing meaningful, early stage event detection. But it's not just the speed of event detection that matters. I think it's the speed of understanding impact, and that's why I'm really excited about what we can do together with the integration into your environment, right? It's like, yeah, I'm seeing the news, I got the report, I see it. Does this impact me? And that, how does this impact me, could be so vast, right? Is that a node in my supply chain? I don't know. I need to have some sort of system like Esri in place to know that. If I don't, I don't even want to know how much work is involved for these poor teams that have to work backwards to try to solve for X, if X is impact. With the complexity of the world, the interconnectedness of supply chains, the remote workforces, and the external factors, right? I think we're hitting that tipping point where any kind of manual approach just isn't sufficient anymore. If that is your corporate approach, it's might not be getting the intelligence in time to take meaningful action. Like you're kind of behind the eight ball in that case, right? So that feels real to us. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it feels like we're past the point of return now. We need to think about scalable, automated ways to have event detection, but also equally automated and very fast ways to understand impact.
yeah, I think the other thing we're seeing, I would assume you're seeing the same thing in terms of what your customers are asking for, but you know, sometimes our customers want to know, even if it doesn't have even if an event is occurring that's not necessarily having a direct impact on their business, they still want to have awareness that those things are happening because it may be an indicator that it's something they need to be getting prepared for, right? Like a civil unrest activity, disturbance where there's like that activity could spur other like activities elsewhere, and now we need to get sort of prepared for those things. And it's not happening on my facility, it's not happening outside of the door, within my four walls or within close proximity, but it's something that's happening that may indicate something that could be happening in the future that I need to be prepared for. And so I would imagine your customers are concerned about those things and are leveraging Samdesk and your ability to not just look down sort of the soda straw of what is happening here at this location at my facility, but you're giving this sort of broader visibility that maybe an organization wouldn't have otherwise, right?
Yeah, the contextual layers are just as important as the impact layers. I mean, it's like, speed to tell me like, hey, very quickly detect and tell me that this is a problem that I directly have. But you're completely right. The contextual environment is equally important, right? A good example with our retail clients that we've been trying to support them with, right, is, crime tactics that are on the rise. So smash and grabs are new tactics that might being deployed against current, security measures, the evolving threat landscape on that side, right? It's the left of bang kind of approach of saying, here is the trend that we're seeing. How do I prepare my facilities? And overlaying that in kind of a geospatial way, right? You can kind of see that heat map where those trend lines are saying, hey, these tactics are used and this is directly impacting your loss prevention program. Although it hasn't hit you, if we can provide you a report or an indicator or a trend line of some nature, that helps you get prepared, doesn't it? Right? It helps you really avoid that happening to your organization. And so that situational or that contextual awareness of things happening around you, I think you're so right, Chris. Even if it's not happening to you, it's important for you to know. We saw that during kind of unrest with hospitals. We saw that as a trend, right? There was conflict happening outside, blocking entry sometimes, and so we worked with a lot of healthcare customers to say, well, maybe this kind of activity hasn't happened in your hospital, but let's not let that happen. Let's not let this trend impede access to healthcare around that. So a lot of examples. I think you're exactly right, Chris. Of it might be happening to similar profiles to you, be it retail, hospitality, other kind of client segments for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, Chris. Really appreciate the chat. Good to kind of like dig into some of the nuances and just unpack. Hopefully, for folks listening, some of the ways that I think the Samdesk layers and kind of partnership inside of Esri could be really helpful for supply chain and retail, private and public sector clients alike. I'm really excited, Chris. I think we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg here of what we can do together. One of my favorite things is hearing back from customers, and we hear that all the time at Samdesk on this show and other words. But looking forward to hearing back on some of the successes that we're going to have together. I know there's a couple of really cool projects coming down the line that I think will be really interesting for people to think about that shift that you put right. Chris, of like we're moving to a static to an ever increasingly dynamic, shifting landscape, and who can we partner with, and how can we get our systems and tools integrated. And that's what really drives us at Samdesk and why we're so excited about Esri is just working with best in class, leaders in their space of how do we support, companies and partners that have solved really hard problems on their own right and bring some of that problem set that we've solved at Samdesk, bring them together. We're pretty excited about the partnership and appreciate the conversation that we've had today, Chris.
Yeah, no, we're super excited. Also, I think what we really enjoy about working with Samdesk is you guys are aligned very well with us in terms of a very strong focus on the customer, right? And really trying to understand the customer's mission, what it is that they're struggling with, or what problems they're trying to solve, and then try to bring solutions to that. And I think, like we've talked about for the last 40 minutes or so, like there's a lot that we can do to help Samdesk customers, I think, do better. And I think there's a lot that Samdesk brings in terms of value to our customers. And at the end of the day, like the customers win, right? They get better capability, they get to be able to do their job more effectively. And for me and for our customers in the public safety space and the security space, like that's a really important thing in order to be able to help keep our communities and our organizations safe places to live and to work.
Awesome, Chris. Love every part of it. Thanks again so much for the chat. Really, really appreciate it. And here's to some exciting new projects to come in the near term. So thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah, no, thank you, appreciate it.